FM credit card training. In this video, we're going to take a look at the integration steps and necessary plugin function calls in order to process credit card transactions. First, we'll look at how to get and set the process mode. Then we'll look at how to process a credit card transaction and how to get the gateway response. Here we're looking at our FileMaker demo file. Let's take a look at our scripts under the hood so we can look at some of our plugin function calls from a developer standpoint. First, you'll notice we have all of our global demo buttons. We can just go ahead and minimize all of those scripts. We don't need those for this demonstration here. And we can minimize these global scripts as well. These are just registration related, plugin checker script, and a few others. So we're going to go ahead and minimize those. And here under the hood in our demo file, we've actually organized the scripts relating to the gateway neatly right beneath the actual name of the gateway. So currently our plugin works with 4 different gateways. We have Authorized.net, PayPal, Ogon, and eWay. And then we have these 2 scripts to set the process mode and get the process mode. And these are really basic. If we just open up the get process mode, here you can see we perform some validation and plugin checker scripts here at the beginning. And then we just simply call the function get process mode in order to retrieve the process mode. Very similar for set process mode. We just basically call the set process mode function and either set the process mode to test or live. A requirement of working with the plugin is that you do need to actually set the process mode. So let's open up Data Viewer for just a moment. We'll navigate to Watch, select Add Expression here, and we'll go ahead and look at all of the functions here by selecting External Functions. And now I can see I have all of the FM credit card functions neatly organized right here. So if we were to actually scroll down to the Get Process Mode function and evaluate that, I can see that I'm actually in test mode. If I were to actually change the process mode using the set process mode function, and I'll go ahead and set it to live since the parameter can only take the values of live or test, I'm going to return a 0 for a success. And if I were to go ahead and call the get process mode, you could now see I'm actually going to be in live mode. For our video purposes here, we're going to set the process mode to test since we do not want to process any live credit card transactions here. Go ahead and set that, and result of 0. 0 always means a success with all of our plugins here. And let's go ahead and begin by working with Authorized.net. So I'm actually going to close this window here, and let's go into our scripts, and let's just adjust some of these window sizes here to fit my screen. And if we go to the Authorized.net, these are all of the scripts that involve working with the Authorized.net gateway. So if we were to go to choose a gateway and authorize, you can see I have various different options. Authorize and capture, authorize, capture, and all of our scripts basically correspond to these different options. But all these scripts beneath these 2 at the top correspond with all of these different tabs. So if we were doing a capture only, we would just open up the capture script, and you can see, of course, we always have our validation and plugin checker script to make sure that the user doesn't get into any trouble. And then here, quite simply, we're just calling the AN capture function followed by the get rest function in order to retrieve the response from the gateway. I think it's better to actually show this in our data viewer rather than running through the script, because you can actually see the values and responses here. So let's go ahead and we'll open the data viewer, navigate to Add Expression, and let's go down to look at all of our functions here. And something to make a note of is there's 4 gateways we work with. All of the authorized functions are all prefixed with AN. So you can see AN are all related to the authorized. The eWay only has 2, and it's all going to be prefixed with EW. The Ogon is prefixed with OG for all of the Ogon related functions. And then PayPal is prefixed with PP. So you can see here these are all the PayPal functions. We're going to start with Authorized.net, and we're actually going to do an authorizing capture. So let me just get the actual function here up, and I'm going to go ahead and just comment that out. And I have a live example here that we're going to show you. And let me just grab this right here and put this in here. So as you can see, my first parameter, which is a required parameter, is the API login ID, which I'm just going to hard code right here for our demonstration purposes. Then I have the transaction key. Again, I'm hard coding that right here. Now the Login ID and transaction key are actually provided by Authorize.net for your unique specific account that you've created. We then have the dollar amount that we want to do an authorization and capture for. I'm going to put in $350. We have the credit card number right here. And we have the expiration date right here. These are required parameters. There are numerous different optional parameters that are available, and we're going to save that for another video. So I'm leaving the optional parameter out of this request. If you ever had any questions as to what any of these parameters are, you can actually go to the functions guide, and I'll go ahead and open that up now. We've organized the functions guide based off of the different gateways. So as you can see here, we have the first part is just error and registration related. Second, our global gateway related functions. Third are all of the Authorize.net related functions, all the PayPal, Ogon, and then eWay. So if we were to actually take a look at the AmOffCap function, which is what we're looking at, here I can see what the actual purpose of this function is. It's going to authorize and capture funds in one action. I can see all the different parameters and the purpose, the values that they take, different formats. I can see the return values. So I'm going to get a transaction ID or I'm going to receive an error. Now you want to store the transaction ID in a safe place in FileMaker, because if you're doing a return or a credit, you're going to actually need to reference the transaction ID for the transaction that you want to do a return or credit on. And we're going to take a look at that a little bit later as well. Let's go back into FileMaker and let's just go ahead and evaluate this here. You can see I have successfully done an Authorize.net authorization and capture in one step, and I have returned the transaction ID here that you would actually store in FileMaker. Let's move forward, and why don't we actually go ahead and look at an Ogon sale function. So again, I'll comment out the actual raw function, and I already have some really nice examples right here for us. And again, we have all of the parameters here, and then we have the values that I've hard-coded in here. If we wanted to go ahead and look at what those parameters were, I could go into the functions guide, and why don't I just go all the way up to the top, and let's take a look at the Ogon sale function right here. And this tells me all of the parameters and the purpose and values. One thing to note about the Ogon functions are that when you're putting in an order ID, it must be a unique ID for each order. And again, we have our required parameters and then our opt param. So let me go into FileMaker. Let me just make sure that this actually is a unique order ID. We may have used that number before, so I'll go ahead and put another number in there. And I'm going to go ahead and evaluate that now. As you can see, my sale's been successfully processed, and this was for 10 euros here, as we can see there. And I did actually get the transaction ID, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that transaction ID, because next thing we're going to show you is actually an Ogon refund. So let me go into Ogon refund right there, and I will go into my text file that I have and grab one of my examples for you. Just put it down one so that way you can actually see the live example there. And I'm going to have to copy this transaction ID because that's going to go right into the pay ID parameter. We do need to fill out an amount. Let's just go ahead and keep it for the same amount of the sale. We'll call it $10. And final is a parameter I'm going to set to true. Can either take the value of true or false. And again, if you're not sure of the values, let's go back to our Acrobat file and let's go ahead and look at an actual Ogon refund here. And here I can see these are all my parameters. So the pay ID is the ID from the original transaction. And then final is what we set to true or false. And final is basically, as you can see, it's whether or not a refund is in the final transaction for the corresponding ID. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go back to FileMaker, and I will go ahead and evaluate this now. And I got a success. It returned again the same transaction ID because it did successfully refund that transaction. You can't provide a final refund twice. So if I'm to evaluate this again, I'm actually going to get an error string. What I can do to capture errors is I can go ahead and call the getLastError function. and I'll go ahead and put in text in order to return a textual description of the error. Here I can see that this is my error that the gateway operation failed because the order's not been settled. And you can dive further into these errors by the getResp function, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment here. Let's go ahead and just continue on and process a PayPal request here. So for PayPal, we are going to do an authorize. Go ahead and comment that out there. And let's go back and grab my sample for PayPal. And as you can see, again, I've pre-populated it with all of the values that we need, just hard coding it in and going to charge $10.01 right here. So let's go ahead and select Evaluate Now, and that should successfully return a transaction ID. There we go. We've now successfully authorized our PayPal account. Now, if we were off a couple values, let's go ahead and maybe we'll change the password to something that we know isn't valid. And we can just go ahead and reevaluate this transaction. We should receive an error. And what you can do is you can either call the getLastError function, which I'll go ahead and do right now. You can leave the parameter blank if you like. I'm going to go ahead and put text in there, and now I can see my description is that the user authentication failed. The getResp function right here actually returns the response from the last gateway. So if we were looking at PayPal, for example, let's just go back to our documentation here and scroll all the way up to the table of contents so you can see, in addition to having all of the function calls, we also have the available keys or fields for the getResp function. So depending on the gateway you're working with, I'll select PayPal since that's the gateway I'm working with. Here I can see these are all of the possible transaction return values. So I can pass all of these different keys to my getResp function. Let's go ahead and we'll just pass results to that, and we'll take a look and see what happens here. I did get a result of 1, so we do need to actually go back, and as we can see here, the outcome of the attempted transaction, a 0 means that it was approved, and any other value for results, such as a 1 that we got back, indicates that it's been declined or an error. So if we want to actually get a message with some text here, we probably want to call resp message. There's all different sorts of combinations that you can do, and let's see what our different result is here. And there I can get a specific error saying user authentication failed. So there's lots of different mixes and matches that you can make depending on your scripting and your FileMaker needs, and we certainly give you the flexibility to do that from within our plugin. Let's stay in FileMaker. Let's cancel out of here, and we will close our data viewer, and let's go look at a couple of our scripts here. So if we were to look at an Ogon sale, which you recall we previously did, you can see that it's really similar to what I was doing in the data viewer. We just have it in script form where you can see we're doing our validation, plugin checkers, we're calling the OG sale function, passing the necessary values. Now, you could even change your scripting if you want the result to actually be error. You could certainly trap for error here and return a custom dialog, or you could just call the getResp function and then pass whatever key or field you want in order to return your desired result. If we were to look at the Ogon gateway and a value for the getResp, let's see what NC error plus is. You can see that's what we're passing to the getResp. So let's go ahead and look at Ogon. Alright, so here we're passing the NC error plus, and as you can see that returns an explanation of the error. So this is just how we have our actual demo file coded. You, like I said again, could call error and then getLastError, or to be more specific and get the actual true response from the gateway, you could call getResp and follow it with whatever field or key you want returned, such as the text or number. There's lots of different flavors and return values that you can get from the gateway. So definitely take a look at this documentation. And that pretty much about wraps it up. Very simple function calls. I'm not going to go ahead and save that. And all dependent on what gateway provider you choose. Again, we work with all 4 of these different gateways. Authorize and PayPal are probably the biggest on the market. Ogon tends to be a little more Euro friendly, and eWay is out of Australia. So we're giving you lots of different varieties depending on your country and what your needs are. Now we can begin to integrate the plugin into your FileMaker solution. Please make sure you utilize all available tools we provide, such as training videos, documentation, and reverse engineer our demo file. If you have any questions, please contact us via email, phone, or browse our forum if you have any questions. We look forward to assisting you in automating your credit card transactions in FileMaker today.